book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. "A slave is as good as gold," Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Middays, the next hour, the second hour of our program today, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the hour, taking your calls. And there is so much in the news. It's hard to know where to begin. I suppose Trump smearing about 3/4 of all American Jews at the same time that he thinks he's bragging. I mean, this is really actually an anti-Semitic trope that Trump is promoting. I mean, he thinks he's attacking Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. And by the way, I don't know if you saw this absolutely viral video of them. Trump made fun of it and said, "Oh, Tlaib has tears." I didn't see it until yesterday afternoon. It was after he had already, said or tweeted something sarcastic about it. But where Rashida Tlaib, whose grandmother is Palestinian and lives in the occupied West Bank, was on the edge of tears. She wasn't crying. And Ilhan Omar was like, stay strong, stay strong. It was really remarkable to see the dynamic between these two women and to see the absolute ferocity of their political commitment. But, what Trump did, on Tuesday, Trump said about Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, Congresswomen Tlaib and Omar. Where have Democrats gone? Where are they defending these two people over the state of Israel? And I think any Jewish people who vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or a great disloyalty. Now, disloyalty to whom? Right, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are supporters of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, the BDS movement, kind of the modern day movement directed at Israel that was very similar to the old, boycott and divestment movement against South Africa back during the Reagan era, when Reagan firmly stood with our ally South Africa, even as they were enforcing apartheid, racial separation, physical and political and economic separation based on race. And many people would argue that that is what's happening in Israel right now, and thus the BDS movement. And this accusation that Jews in the United States are more loyal to the United States than they are to more loyal to Israel than they are to the United States is absolutely one of the most poisonous anti-Semitic tropes that are out there. I mean, this is simply a variation on Hitler's old thing that Jews were more loyal to the international Jewish movement than they were to Germany. And then, Hungary said that the Jews were more loyal to the Jews than they were to Hungary. And then Poland, and every country in Europe where Jews were rounded up and slaughtered with the, in many cases, the enthusiastic participation with the Nazis. It was this very trope that was used. This very meme, this very idea that Jews are loyal to anything other than the country in which they're living, that they are a people apart. And that is absolutely not true for the vast majority of Jews. And yet this is a white supremacist trope, using the white supremacist's own definition that Jews are not white, in quotes. And frankly, it shouldn't be a surprise here that Trump is going after two women of color who are also Muslim. And he's telling American Jews, hey, if you don't join me in hating these Muslim women, then you're not loyal to Israel. Really? 79% of Jewish people in the United States in the 2018 election voted for Democrats. In 2016, 71% of Jewish Americans voted for Hillary Clinton. And then we get Wayne Allen Root, who's been on this program many times. He's one of the few conservatives who's willing to come on and debate me and discuss things with me. And although it's been probably, a year or two, Sean, since he's been on, he tweeted out. Now, consider this. He tweeted, Wayne Root, who is, a hard right about as far as they get, right? He tweeted, President Trump is the greatest president for Jews and for Israel in the history of the world, not just America. He is the best president for Israel in the history of the world, and the Jewish people in Israel love him. He's the king of Israel. They love him like he is the second coming of God. But American Jews don't know him or like him. They don't even know what they're doing or saying anymore. It makes no sense. Now, that's pretty bad. And then Trump retweeted it. Thanked Wayne Allen Root for saying this. Wayne Allen Root, by the way, if you haven't caught my debates with him over the years, he's been on here talking about how, on a couple of occasions, how Obama was not born in the United States, how Seth Rich was killed by the Clintons, how the Las Vegas mass shooting was clearly a coordinated Muslim terror attack, and so on. Laura Clausen writing about this over at Daily Kos, by the way, for if you want a deeper dive. So then in Maryland, this guy was arrested. He said, I thank God every day Donald John Trump is president, a neo-Nazi, for threatening Hispanic women. I mean, this is pretty breathtaking. And then, a month or so ago, 6-8 weeks ago, two men were involved in a single car accident in New Jersey. State police arrived and, it was an accident, right? The police show up and they discover an arsenal of weapons in the car. And so then they go and search the guy's home. Joseph Rubino is his name. And they found 17 guns, brass knuckles, hollow point bullets, and a grenade launcher. He also had a large amount of drugs and neo-Nazi materials, including a very disturbing manual with, quote, instructions on owning a slave. 70 grams of methamphetamine, boxes of bumper stickers and clothing with the SS bolts, which the prosecutors said are common white supremacist and Nazi symbols. Gee, you think? Semi-automatic handguns, shotguns, rifles with scopes, a grenade launcher. And these are the guys who write screeds saying, or the kinds of guys who write screeds saying, like this guy, this neo-Nazi, I thank God every day Donald John Trump is president. I mean, what do we do with this? Where do we go with this? Shockeye80 is posting over at DU, and I think that he makes a really good point. That pretty much, we had a guest on a while ago, a former Republican who wrote a book called Everything Trump Touches Dies. Remember who wrote that, Sean? It'll come to you. It'll come to me too. Anyhow, he's been kind of making the rounds. And, at first it sounded like, okay, it's a cute book title. But when you think about it, I mean, President Putin, Rick Wilson was the Republican strategist who wrote the book. President Putin, whether he ordered the Russian involvement in the U.S. election or not, and there's some debate there, although I think the general consensus in our intelligence community is that he absolutely ordered it. But regardless, one way or the other, he probably thought when Trump was elected, hey, Trump has been saying we need to have a better relationship with Russia. But soon Putin is going to have to face the Democrats, and he's going to lose. This is not going to work out well. In fact, so far it's not working out for Russia well. Israel thinks they won. Trump ended the Iran deal, but it didn't help Israel. In fact, what it did was it stirred up instability in the Middle East, and it could be setting the stage for World War III. Israel ejected themselves into our politics. Paul Ryan invited Netanyahu over to speak to Congress and didn't even tell Obama about it. And it was just like completely snubbing the president of the United States. And a lot of Democrats looked at that and said, okay, we know where Israel's loyalties are. Now, the tragedy of this is that Netanyahu doesn't represent Israel's loyalties. He's actually, he's only supported by about a third of Israelis. But because they have a parliamentary system, he's able to form a coalition and, hold things together at the same time that he's been indicted for multiple crimes, and his wife. But anyhow, Israel injected themselves into our politics and they lost friends, and I don't think Democrats are going to forget that. Shockeye writes, Republicans in Congress thought they won when Trump was elected. They got their judges and their tax cuts. But our book report for the day is by Stanley Greenberg. It's titled R.I.P. GOP, How the New America is Dooming the Republicans. And he's talking about literally the death of the modern Republican Party, and I think it's entirely possible. They may never recover. Voters think they won when Trump was elected. So here we've got, the second coming of God, really? So the question, can the 25th Amendment be used to stop the second coming of God, that being Donald Trump? Is it time for the 25th Amendment? Or is this something that we show up at the polls for? I mean, since the mass executions in El Paso by a white nationalist citing Donald Trump, 6 other right-wing terrorists have been stopped and their guns taken away before they could commit crimes. One posted a statement of his purpose, quote, I thank God every day President Donald John Trump is president, and that he will launch a racial war and crusade to keep the N-word, SPI word for Hispanics and Muslims, and any dangerous non-white or ethnic or culturally foreign group in line. He puts in line in quotes. By in line, it is meant that they will either be sent to concentration camps or dealt with ruthlessly and vigorously by the United States military. Trump's re-election strategy is to activate and encourage his neo-Nazi base, but is placing the rest of Americans at huge risk. And his concentration camps are destroying the lives of refugees and asylum. And now that he's tweeted that he's the second coming of God, it's even less likely he's going to listen to any advice. So it's getting even weirder. What do you suggest we do?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How do we address a man in the presidency, in the White House? I mean, the 25th Amendment requires the vice president and the cabinet. Parts of the cabinet are acting. So, I mean, even the business leaders thought that they had won with Donald Trump, right? Nope, sorry, they didn't. The business leaders got screwed too. I mean, it's like, he's destroying the economy now. It's nuts. I don't know how to describe it beyond that, but I just think it's nuts. And as I said, Shock Eye 80 is writing, everyone loses when you elect a lunatic president. And this is so true. I mean, this is just absolutely what's going on. So, do you have thoughts on how we should? By the way, I think I already mentioned Congressman Pocan will be with us in the second hour. More tax cuts to the wealthy coming. We're going to be considering that in our third hour today, by the way. 76 of Donald Trump's campaign promises. I'm going to get through those, too, as we go through the day. Jackie in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Jackie, thanks for listening and tuning in. What's up?
Yeah, I wanted to point out another lunatic thing Trump said yesterday. He said he had broad support within the gay community because log cabin Republicans came out and endorsed him.
Right.
Log cabin Republicans always support the Republican president. And they're a very minority group within the gay community. And even log cabin Republicans quit the organization because they endorsed Trump. He is reviled within the gay community.
Yeah.
To cite log cabin Republicans and say you have broad support within the gay community is just hilarious.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Trump has just gone around the edge here on this thing. And do you think that, Jackie, do you think that this is a signal of how deluded Donald Trump is, or is it a signal of how ignorant he is about the subtleties of politics in the United States? Or do you think he was just, hey, somebody else said something and I'm going to, and it's about me and it's nice, and so I'm going to, fawn all over it?
I posted today, I think he's delusional. I really think he is delusional. He said thoughts.
But what does that mean?
Well, like buying Greenland. He's not going to be able to buy Greenland. It's just he needs mental health help.
Yeah.
I think he wanted to buy Greenland because he subscribes to the pioneer economics theory that went out with Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Maybe he thinks he can refreeze it and stop sea level rise. If we could just put enough refrigerators there, it is really quite breathtaking. You've got the Prime Minister of Greenland. I saw her on TV this morning, and she's like, we were looking forward to a conversation. And by the way, the Prime Minister is anti-immigrant. She shares Donald Trump's thoughts on immigrants, right? And it's really. I mean, this isn't the first foreign trip that he's canceled, of course, but man, what a mess. Jackie, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening and tuning in there in Kansas City, Missouri. We'll be back. What do we do about this? Where do you think this is going? Actually, maybe that's a better question. What's the end point? Right? Where do we end up if we keep going down this road that we're on? We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. As mentioned, this portion of our program brought to you by Phone.com. And, kind of a variation on my question of, what do we do about this? I think, maybe even a more important question, and one that I've really been grappling with. And frankly, longtime, watchers and listeners to this program know that I've been grappling with this program, with this question for, well, actually, through the Bush administration, I was concerned about this. And now with the Trump administration, I'm very concerned about this. The rise of fascism in the United States. And really two forms of fascism. Although they merge. I mean, they merged in the Nazi Party, they merged in Mussolini's party, they merged in Franco's party in Spain. These two kinds merged in Chile under Allende. They're merging right now in Jair Bolsonaro's Brazil. They merged, obviously, in Turkey under Erdogan. And that is, on the one hand, the people who are the racial haters, the people who would divide people from each other along lines of race, gender identification, religion. In every single one of those cases, we've seen this, right? Oh, those people are your enemy because they are fill in the blank, a different color, a different religion, have a different national origin because they're refugees or immigrants. You know, like I said, fill in the blank. So there's that part of fascism. And then the other part of fascism is the classic definition, the one that Mussolini came up with, although he used racial, baiting against Jews and Gypsies in large part, but also other immigrants to Italy, to serve his ends. But the other part of it is the merger of corporate and state interests. And corporations, being amoral psychopaths, essentially, have obviously no problem with tearing people apart based on race or religion or gender identity. But the larger question, I think, rather than what do we do about this, is where does this take us? I mean, are we going down the road towards something like, well, let's set aside Nazi Germany. We don't have yet death camps, although we've had 7 children now die in Trump's detention camps. And now the Flores Agreement, which was back in 1997, says that ICE and CBP cannot hold people more than 20 days. Trump rewrote that rule yesterday. Well, actually, Stephen Miller rewrote that rule yesterday, and they're just doing away with it so that families and children can be detained indefinitely. Now, that's a violation of the due process protections of the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th Amendments to the Constitution. But Trump doesn't care. I mean, he'll get sued for this, but I don't think he cares. But in any case, where are we going with this? Is there another country that we can look at or another time in history that we can look at and say, oh, yeah, that's where we're going? I don't think it's Nazi Germany. But I think that, Franco's Spain, Mussolini's Italy, Chile under General Pinochet, maybe China. Maybe China. China has, this oppressive, repressive state that is participating in capitalism. Well, so far, the state, no, we're supporting the oil billionaires, we're subsidizing them, we're subsidizing the monopolists on the internet.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Where does all this go? 27 minutes past the hour. We'll get your thoughts on this right after the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann.
Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, entitled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance. subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native American, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly, as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Yeah, Greenland is not for sale, but the people who live there are pretty ripped about all this. Anyhow, Michael in Newport Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, Tom. It's morning now. Good morning up there. Thank you for the work you're doing and your crew and everybody. I love your show, and this I was telling the screener there. I just really believe this winter, if the Democrats win, it'll be this winter because these people are going to be they're so jacked up now. And if the air gets let out of their bag, it'll just happen like overnight, like it happened when Trump won, and it's going to be a millionfold because these people will act. And
who are these people that you're talking about?
These people that just the people who are. I mean, they're finding more and more guns stored, in people's places, and
so these people that you're talking about are the right-wing snowflakes who are running around with guns.
Right, those people, and I think that this will push many more of them over to a place where they're going to be in a spot where, oh my God, they've got this country back for 4 years, and so I think even the ones who aren't really violent will be pushed ahead further to act.
So in other words, what you're saying is that if Donald Trump loses and the Republicans lose, that's going to be perceived by the white supremacists and white nationalists as the last gasp of white nationalism in America and the beginning of a truly multiracial, multi-religious, pluralistic society. And that will be intolerable, and so they will double down on Tim McVeigh's effort to start a race war or start a revolution or both.
But the good part of it, Tom, is that they used to talk about a silent majority, and there is a silent majority, and there's just a lot of folks like me. I'm an older guy, and if it happens, trust me. I mean, I'm from the Jewish Christian way of believing in peace. But if these guys go there, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to. The silent majority in this country will show them. I mean, like you folks up in Portland, and there's a lot of this country who will react, and we know they know who we are, we know who they are, and I don't want to see it happen. Trust me. I love this country.
Yeah, I mean, this is the we know who they are, they know who we are. That's the kind of language that preceded the American Civil War. That's the kind of language that preceded the slaughter of the Hutus or the Tutsis. Yeah. That's the kind of language that preceded the slaughter of Jews and union workers and communists and gay people and gypsies in Germany.
Yeah. You're right, and for to bounce that back on me, that's food for my thought. I really, because I hope I'm open, and I have a lot of friends who I just listen to the stuff they talk about.
Well, my concern is not just you saying it, Michael. My bigger concern is that they're saying it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Got you.
You will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. Remember?
Yeah. Right. But I know this country, and I know that they're outspoken and they're out in the news and they're out in front. But I think that if it does happen, that they're going to be surprised who shows up at these rallies, because we've seen a little bit of that already in this country.
Yeah.
Who's been showing up?
If it starts turning violent, then it's going to get a whole lot worse really, really fast, and we need to do everything we can to stop that. Michael, I'm going to move along, but thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to KPFK. Charles in Newberry, Michigan. Wow, I used to run a radio station in Newberry, Michigan, WNBY.
You did.
Yeah, you're in the Upper Peninsula, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 1971, I think it was. Louise and I lived up there. Louise was pregnant with our first child, and I was running that radio station for the summer.
Cool.
I was on the air. I came in the morning, emptied the waste baskets, fired up the transmitter, and did the morning show. Anyhow, what's up, Charles?
Lee Van Dam. That's a name from the past.
Yeah.
What I was calling about, Tom, was a theory that I think holds fast with Donald Trump, that was written some 80 years ago by a man named Ernst Fraenkel. And it was a book he wrote about called The Dual State. And he describes it as first the normative state and then the prerogative state. And basically the normative is, keep the trains running on time, and the prerogative state is just what it says. I'm going to do whatever I want.
Right. My prerogative.
And, that's the prerogative state. Ernst Frankl was a man who fled Nazi Germany as a young man.
Yeah.
And moved to Chicago, got a law degree at the University of Chicago, and then wrote this book describing Nazi Germany.
Right.
And the prerogative, to me, because of Trump's background in business, you look at he was never a publicly held company.
Right.
He could never work for a board.
Right.
A, he's too much of an egotist, and B, they'd have a microscope on him.
Well, I don't think any board would tolerate the incoherent business strategies of Donald Trump. He's had far more bankruptcies than successes, and the successes that he's had have been in large part because either and Charles, I gotta drop you here. Your phone is going nuts. But they have been either because his father was backstopping him, or because somebody else was backstopping him. Somebody was bailing him out. And, oligarchs from former Soviet Union countries, buying his land and stuff. I mean, he and his kids have bragged about this. So, not a good thing. Anyhow, Michelle in Panama City, California. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
Panorama City. Hi.
Panorama.
You were asking where you think this was going, and you were talking about more extreme fascist regimes. I think that if Trump had his way, it would go much more towards like Russia is. The oligarchs basically run everything. They're getting rich off the public. They suppress people's views all the time, left and right, intolerant to any ethnic groups, intolerant to gays. They put them in jail, they beat them up. And just, basically Vladimir Putin is seen as this savior of the whole thing. He puts himself out there.
Well, it's not just Russia. It's not just Russia. The same thing is happening in India with Modi. The same thing is happening in the Philippines with Duterte. The same thing is happening in Brazil with Bolsonaro. The same thing is happening in Hungary and Poland. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the names of their leaders, but the same thing is happening in Turkey with Erdogan. Every single one of these countries have gone to an authoritarian leadership with oligarch support. And I think you're absolutely right that is the governing model that Donald Trump not only wants for America, but actually I think he thinks America has always had.
Right. And that was my point when you were talking about the World War II fascists, which really were a bit different than what is currently happening.
Right. Yeah. This is a softer fascism that's a little heavier on oligarchy and on strong leaders stuff, but doesn't. We've not yet flipped over into murder of people, although 7 children have now died in Trump's concentration camps, and 3 of them died of the flu. And the people running the concentration camps announced yesterday that they're not going to give flu vaccines to anybody in their quote care. To anybody that they've got locked up, and that they're going to be able to indefinitely detain these children. What is this going to do to these children's minds? On top of what it's already done, it's mind-boggling, Michelle.
Right. It's horrible. I mean, and just a side note to let you know, I'm Jewish, and the only people I live in Los Angeles, which has a big Jewish community. Really, the only subgroup of Jewish people that support Trump and the Republicans are the Persian Jews, because most of them are immigrants from Iran.
Interesting.
And it is, because even one of my friends whose uncle is actually very liberal jokes around that he's the black sheep of the family.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's. I mean,
And
there's extraordinary diversity in the Jewish community.
Right. And that's that's the whole point. Is most of us were horrified at everything, and most people don't even know that somebody's Jewish because of all the persecution historically that Jews have had. We don't go and broadcast that we're a certain religion out to anybody in public, and because I don't look like a stereotypical Jew, I have had many people say anti-Semitic things to me, thinking I'm a Christian.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So,
I know from Jewish friends that that's not an uncommon thing, unless their last name is Cohen or Greenberg, something like that. But yeah, absolutely.
right, exactly.
Yeah, Michelle, thank you for the call, and thanks for the points you made. They're brilliant. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, Mussolini and Hitler.
Yeah, Tom. First, you're talking about the worst thing that guy does. There's nothing worse than abusing children, and nobody should make any mistake. There's slavery and pedophilia involved in this. It doesn't get any
How so? You mean, are you talking about the hundreds of missing children who might have been sold off to child labor rings or God only knows what?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's so obvious. That is just so obvious with all the other details that are going on in our paradigm.
Yeah. But I would be very careful, about that kind of language, just because of the right-wing theory that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring out of the pizza parlor in D.C. Although, sometimes what people do is they accuse other people of what they would like to do. But, let's set that aside for a minute, James, and get back to Mussolini and Hitler, okay?
Yeah, okay. I was just wondering, making a comparison there, and I think the fields are totally different because of the time and place and so many other things on the social order. But I was just wondering if you think, a little bit about history, Tom. Do you think this idiot's even as smart as Hitler and Mussolini? I mean, they could read a speech. They could memorize and speak lines. This guy can't even read a teleprompter,
right.
No,
I think the thing that you have to remember, I mean, Hitler's one of Hitler's closest confidants wrote that he was incredibly lazy. He was rarely up before 11 in the morning. He was an absolute sugar junkie. He ate junk food, even though he was a vegetarian. He didn't get along well with people. He would rage. He was obsessed with his own image. Every day they brought him clippings from the newspapers about how he was being written about and what people thought of him.
He could read a teleprompter, though.
Yeah, well, they didn't have teleprompters back then, but Hitler could read a pretty good speech. Yeah, you're right. But he was also trained in that. And Trump was trained in the nuance of reality TV, but I'm not sure he was ever trained to read in fact, I'd say he was never trained to read a teleprompter, because it's fairly obvious by how poorly he reads them. Although that may just be a function of the fact that he's wearing contacts and he doesn't have multifocal contacts, or his contacts don't do a real good job for him when he's trying to read off the teleprompter. I don't know, but his affect, his tone of voice and his posture and the way he speaks and all that kind of stuff when he's reading from a teleprompter is so distinctly different from when he's just talking. Blurring the distinction between the two is something that Obama was absolutely brilliant at, that it makes him a less effective orator. But I don't think people care about his oration. I think that they're just gung-ho on his policies. James, thanks for the call. As long as his policies, of course, are dissing people of color and people who are not Christian. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Well, let me rephrase that. Dissing people who are not his version of Christians. And welcome back. Jim in Cumming, California, listening on KFOI FM. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Oh, hey, Tom. Thank you, calling me. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and you were asking what is coming. Well, I think in the immediate future we have Trump. It seems clear that he's not going to win the election, so I think he and his minions are creating a storm of chaos so that he can declare martial law, suspend democracy, suspend the election, say stay in for some time. But on the bigger picture, I think we're in a global transition time. Trump and Putin and all the list of autocrats you listed there. I think they're more like sheriffs of Nottingham's for the oligarchs. The oligarchs are really pulling it down, and that's the same thing that's been going on for a long time with the slaveholders or the the royalty and
the banksters
holding down.
Yeah.
What's that?
The banksters.
And so I think the banks. Yeah, I think where we're at is a place of evolution where, power is the proxy for power is money, and money is how we control the resources of the world. But every human being is born with power, and we've somehow given it up to, be led by the state or royalty or however it comes out, some sort of religious.
Yeah, I think, to a certain extent, we grow up with parents, and so we tend to think of people who present themselves as parental figures as sources of safety and support and guidance. And, evil dad, but nonetheless, that's the role that Trump has been playing. Jim, good points all. Thank you. Helen in Fairmont, West Virginia. Hey, Helen, what's on your mind?
Oh, I watched Trevor Noah the other night. He was playing back a lot of Trump's speeches. And he didn't even make sense. I mean, he was like he was out of it, like he was on drugs or tired, like when
I've heard all those theories, Helen, and I think, probably age is, tearing at him, pulling at him, but I think the big problem is that he's just not that smart. He never was that smart. That's why he keeps failing at business.
Oh, I think he's just plain evil myself, is what I think.
Well, how do you define evil?
Evil is someone who doesn't care about anybody. I don't even think he really cares about himself, to tell you the truth.
I think he cares about himself, but I agree that he lacks empathy, and if that's your definition of evil, then yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me tell you a little story. I was up at the mall the other day, and there was this immigrant family there. I heard the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Mm-hmm. And I asked an employee there where that was coming from, and he said, there's a man that's been here since this morning. And it was one of those really hot days. So I drove over to see what it was. And it was an immigrant family, and he was playing the accordion. And I'd never heard what I would call classical accordion before. All I ever heard.
Remarkable. Yeah. No, immigrants add to the richness and diversity of our country. It's well established. Helen, thank you. That's a great story. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Just a reminder that in 10 or 15 minutes, Congressman Mark Pocan is going to be with us taking your calls. So, if you've got a question for him or you want to lobby him, you can queue up, although right now all the lines are full. Rocco in Houston, Texas. Hey, Rocco, what's up?
Well, you were, I called in kind of with a different subject, but it ties into what you're saying. And this is speculation. I really, from all the things that you reiterated this morning, I really think this push with Greenland for Greenland is serious. I mean, when they said they weren't interested, he just walked away. That doesn't mean he won't come back, because we know he does. And what pulling together of just different thoughts and speculating, I think he would like to make Greenland a gulag, to put political prisoners or anything.
Well, he's got Gitmo for that, and he could always, reprise a FEMA camp. I mean, he could do what his followers thought Obama was doing. But the simple fact of the matter is that as the ice recedes in Greenland, there are apparently rare earth minerals in Greenland. There may well be natural gas in Greenland. In northern Greenland, we may see large deposits of oil. Northern Greenland is also on the Arctic or in the Arctic, and the Arctic is becoming, we are competing basically with Russia for dominance in the Arctic. And when it goes ice-free.
It would be great to have slave labor take care of all that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there you go.
I don't think it's funny, Tom.
I know you're dead serious. I'm skeptical, but
no, I'm skeptical too. But
he's got slave labor right now in his prisons. I mean, some of these immigrants are being made to work in these private prisons where they've got so-called work training programs, and of course the private prisons all over the United States for just normal Americans are right. Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still allowed in the United States as long as it's under color of law, as long as it's somebody who's been convicted or arrested for or convicted of a crime. So, or maybe just convicted. So, that's moving forward. So, yeah, Rocco, I'm not discounting it. Thank you for the call. Steve in Alton, Illinois. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Long time, first time, as they say.
Thanks, Steve.
I hear about the 25th Amendment every once in a while, and people should be aware it's simply not available. Only Senate-confirmed cabinet members can participate in a 25th Amendment hearing, and there is no quorum of such.
Because he's got acting cabinet members and some that simply aren't filled?
Exactly.
It's been a while. It's been a few months since I've read the 25th Amendment, but I don't see anything in there about Senate confirmed.
Otherwise, they're not a cabinet member. By definition, they're not a cabinet member unless they've been confirmed by the Senate.
Okay, so A, he doesn't have a quorum in the cabinet, and B, the process has to be initiated by the vice president. And Mike Pence is a spineless wimp who goes with whoever gives him the most money. I mean, it's why he used to write op-eds saying tobacco doesn't cause cancer.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, so the normal 25th Amendment process is simply not available. And the alternative, which is to be a panel empowered by the House, the results of which would then have to be confirmed by the Senate. So that 25th Amendment is simply not an option.
Yeah. I think they need to impeach him in the House and not even refer it to the Senate. And that way it would be like a censure motion only with some teeth, and it would go down in history humiliating him, which I think would be a really good thing. Steve, thank you for the call. Will in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Will, what's up? Will? No, Will. Freddie in Oak Lawn, Pennsylvania, or Illinois, excuse me. Freddie, you got the last minute before the end of the hour. What's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thank you. I enjoy your show. I'm a contributor and everything. And I just wanted to make a comment about Mussolini. He was, I'm Mexican-American, and I found out that Benito Mussolini was named after the Mexican revolutionary and president of Mexico, Benito Juarez, who modeled himself on Abraham Lincoln. And I'm just so perplexed that, that his father, Mussolini's father, must have admired that man to name his son after him. And, I guess in this case, the apple fell pretty far from the tree. But, it's just rare. It's beyond me that in the beginning between Hitler and Mussolini was the stronger influence. And then it diminished. And I'm wondering if the same thing could happen between Trump and Putin. Or some other oligarch or something like that. I'll take my comments off the air.
Yeah, thanks, Freddie. Increasingly, anything is possible. Anything is possible. And the difference between Mussolini and Hitler was, Mussolini was not engaged in mass murder. He was certainly an authoritarian, and he locked up his enemies, and he gave the state over to the corporations. But he didn't go as far as the mass murder that Hitler did. And that I guess we should give him credit for that. His people didn't. They hanged him upside down, in a gas station, for God's sake.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, titled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence, and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable, to perpetual creation, be it Native Americans, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Founding of this country. The second hour of our program, it is Wednesday, it's midweek, so it's time for Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. And Congressman, what's on your mind this morning?
Oh, boy. The president's been on a Twitter roll again, not just today, the last few days. And, from the craziness of not meeting with the leadership of Denmark because they won't sell him Greenland, to him calling Jewish voters disloyal if they don't support him and his political party, to him caving to the NRA again on background checks.
Well, he's implying, actually, that they're disloyal if they don't support Israel in the indirect path through him.
Exactly.
And that's one of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes out there.
Exactly. It's the dual loyalty sort of language he's using. And for a guy who said he has all the best words, he just doesn't know how to use them, clearly. Because
apparently, yes.
In that situation, I'm sure he's going to be backing away from that in the next 24 hours as well.
Yeah, it's nuts. So, shall we pick up phone calls?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's go for it. Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. Tom, you should try to get Dan Sheehan back on your show. And, Congressman, why can't you introduce a law where every congressman or lawmakers can go into every one of these detention centers anytime with no warning, go in with camera crews, doctors, and nurses? They are guilty of kidnapping and torture and negligent homicide. Please introduce a bill so you can go see what the situation is.
Yeah, Jim, actually, that's already been done. We put it as an amendment in the appropriations process that we should be able to go without any notice. Right now, I think we have to give a certain amount of notice, and even then, in some cases, they can turn you down. And I believe a separate piece of legislation was introduced by Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So, already done, Jim. We've put it in a bill that's moving forward, that in a must-pass bill, so there's a chance we can get that in agreement with the Senate, and I completely agree with you. There's no reason that we shouldn't know what's happening with our taxpayer dollars in these facilities.
Isn't it amazing? Republicans do any little thing and the entire country knows about it, or at least any little thing that might reflect well on them. Democrats do all kinds of cool stuff, and nobody knows anything about it because the media is only interested in horse races and the politics of personality, essentially, rather than policy. It just boggles my mind.
Exactly. And, this all started about a year ago when we had some turndowns that happened, I believe, in Florida. We were sitting in the Appropriations Committee. I'm sitting next to Deborah Wasserman-Schultz. I mentioned something. We did an amendment, put it in last year's version. This year we're in charge. We put it in the version for sure. It's there with, I think this time it is no notice whatsoever. I think before we might have had 24-hour notice. And, I think it has a real chance this time because we're in the majority. But, again, none of that ever gets covered by the mainstream media. But we do know plenty about Denmark.
Yeah.
And
there you go. Yeah. The stuff that's not so consequential. Victoria in Lacombe, Louisiana. Victoria, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Polkman. How you doing?
Very good, Victoria.
I got a question. Putin wants a proxy signature in order to take over his position as president of Russia. What's going to happen to Putin whenever he drops out of office? And is he going to hide in the shades and then come back later on?
I'm sorry, are we talking about the president?
She was asking what will happen with Putin if he's not reelected or if he ends his presidency.
If in Russia, I'm sorry.
Yes, in Russia.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's got protests that he hasn't had recently, but we also know how he deals with protest in Russia. I think he's got a position for life unless there's far more protesters in Russia building. But, at least we're seeing some cracks in the dictatorship that he's run up to this point. So, but I don't have a more specific answer, Victoria.
Jim in New Berlin, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Well, hi there. I got a question for you. I can understand why people say that a single-payer system would be sort of a losing issue for lots of people who get insurance through their companies because they would lose their plans and then they would have to pay for a government plan. Why hasn't anybody suggested that employers be required to take the money that they're currently spending for insurance, add it to their salaries, and thereby they get a raise, and since the new insurance should be better and cheaper, they actually get a raise, but the company is paying the same amount of money.
Yeah, Jim, I think it's even simpler than that. I've actually heard this on MSNBC and been a bit surprised at how ignorant some of the hosts have been of this issue. For one, we think there's a lot of cost savings by getting rid of the profit, the administration, some of the other areas that will clearly provide that savings. But to a small business owner, if they're not paying for it under the current employer-based model, that money will go to higher pay, hiring more employees, buying new equipment to make the business go better. And for any union, for example, and this is where I heard it just yesterday on MSNBC, said incorrectly, yes, part of your benefit package is your negotiated health insurance, but if you would now have a system, a single-payer system in the United States, you clearly would renegotiate for additional pay, and they clearly would have money to do that. So to say somehow you're giving something up because everyone would now have health insurance is one of the most ridiculous arguments I've heard, and yet I heard it, I believe, twice yesterday while driving around my state in my car listening to MSNBC. So it's just a clear point that needs to be driven home, that it is not saying you lose your health insurance, therefore you get nothing extra. Quite the opposite. That employer now has more money, and you can bargain for better pay, and you can do a lot of things.
Yeah, MSNBC, particularly their morning programming, has become basically the voice of neoliberalism. It's pretty shocking.
And it was yesterday morning. I believe I heard it too. Yeah.
David in Buffalo, New York, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Congressman Pocan. Tom, thank you. The nuclear radiation detectors in Russia after the explosion were shut down. And I'm under the impression that in the Northwest and Midwest, we had nuclear radiation detectors, but they have been let to go quiet. Some were battery operated, some were generated in other ways or powered, but they no longer work. The majority of them, and this information came out at least 8 years ago. And I was wondering, are you aware of this? Is this true? And if it is true, when might we hear something about a resolution to that? Because it seems to be a concern.
David, are you talking about the detectors that were turned off after Fukushima?
Well, no, the missile that was exploded in Russia,
their radiation detectors have been turned off. Okay,
yeah,
let's
I was
get
talking about ours in the United States.
Right.
We have sensors in the Northwest and West that have been allowed to go quiet over time. And it's
okay, let's ask
like
Congressman. You've already said that, Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, David, I haven't heard anything about that directly, so I couldn't speak to it. I can tell you this, though. There is a foundation based actually in Madison, Wisconsin, a national foundation. Former Ambassador Tom Loftus is involved with it. He was an ambassador to Norway, former Speaker of the Wisconsin Assembly. And their whole focus is to deal with ridding the world of nuclear arms. And I just sat down with them, I believe it was last week, and we talked about this situation. It was right after it happened. And by all of their standards, and they have a lot of knowledge in this area, they think there's a whole lot more information that is going to come out about this. And I'm very intrigued by that because they do a great work, Outrider Foundation. They have a great website, and you can see what would happen if there was a nuclear attack in your area, how much damage and killing there would be.
Are they concerned about nuclear power plants melting down?
They do climate change and nuclear weapons as the main two focuses.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Pocan's website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And welcome back. Let's see here. Michael in Duarte, California. Is that right, Michael?
That's Duarte, California.
Duarte. Okay, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Duarte. I'm on just a suburb of L.A., about 20 miles south east of Los Angeles downtown. Okay. I'm really concerned, Tom. I'm really concerned about the impeachment proceedings. We must impeach. I just read that Litzman, the man who predicted the last nine elections, has said that we are gone. The Democrats are gone if we do not impeach. It is very important that we impeach. And I would like to ask the congressman and you, what are the chances of this, and why are the Democrats dragging their feet so much? And do you think we'll eventually get there to the impeachment, which is a must, in my opinion? A must.
Congressman?
Yeah, Michael, so a few things. One, impeachment's going to take votes from both parties, so that is a reality we all have to recognize, and I don't think we're there yet. I can tell you this. I do think the impeachment investigation / inquiry has begun. I think we are in a semantical jumble game as Democrats, unfortunately. I think we've handled it very poorly in how we talk about this, but very clearly what Judiciary Committee is up to under Jerry Nadler is launching the investigation, trying to get more court support to compel witnesses to come so that you can have the information to then put forward to try to gain the Republican votes. So whether or not that ultimately will get Republican votes for impeachment, I think is still a question mark. I don't think that we've done an especially good job on the semantics of what we're talking about, but I do believe we are in that process right now to try to compel witnesses with what most of us would call an impeachment inquiry. I think we're having a semantical problem saying it from our leadership, but I do believe that's where we're at.
When you say Republican votes, I assume you're talking about the Senate?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And what if the House? I mean, you're familiar with the Reagan Legacy Project, right?
Yes.
And there's been leaks out of the White House that Trump's trying to do the exact opposite to Obama. He's trying to erase any record of Obama having any accomplishments from the historical record, so people will look back on the Obama presidency as a complete failure. So in that historical context, what if the House was to impeach Trump and then not even bother referring it to the Senate, simply have it a stain on his record for all time?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that's an option. But I do think the biggest thing we've been saying is, excuse me, and rightfully so, to get the votes I think we need, even from all the Democrats, is we need to compel some of these witnesses. I mean, Don McGahn coming and saying that he was clearly instructed to fire Robert Mueller after Donald Trump has said he's tweeted that he didn't tell him that is powerful, and we need that information. So we do need to crank up what we're doing to the impeachment inquiry level. I do think it was very sloppily done by our leadership, because now I think the term we're using is investigation, and why we're lost in semantics, I am lost on a rationale for that.
Right.
But I do think we need to have some of those witnesses come and say some things to get us closer to any next step.
Yeah, and that being lost in semantics puts us at risk if the Supreme Court says, no, this isn't a real impeachment inquiry.
I agree, Tom. I tell you, when I had to leave and I was confused before we came back for the August break, think how much everyone else must be confused.
Yeah.
And I serve there.
Yeah, there you go. If anybody should know, it should be you.
I would hope.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, one of the big cheese progressives in the U.S. House of Representatives, well, in all of Congress, actually, for that matter, is on the line taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. So we just put up a new... every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Anything goes Friday. Excuse me. It's Congressman Mark Pocan. I've got a couple of set pieces here that just, kind of drop into autopilot.
No problem.
There you go. Thank you. Let's see here. Henry in Atwater, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, this is Henry. I'm calling about the how we would go about paying for a single-payer medical insurance system. This was actually studied in 2005 in California by an industry group called the Lewin Group, found that I believe a 12% tax would cover everything. Kind of the short story in this, I was at that time paying $14,000 a year for my coverage through my employer. Under the single-payer system, my total costs would be about $6,500. Full coverage, dental, vision, the whole works, right? No deductibles, no coinsurance. So single-payer is absolutely more cost-effective than the so-called system we have. Again, people should look up the Lewin Group analysis. There's two of them, a 10-page executive summary, and then the full 116-page report. But they're really great.
Got it, Henry. Got it. Let's let Congressman Pocan respond. Thank you.
Yeah, Henry, and I would argue I've seen a lot of other ones that are even better, I think, that show where savings are and why the cost isn't that much. But I think one thing you said I really want to drill home, because people often forget about, is you wouldn't have deductibles. Right away, if you think of everyone right now who's on the Affordable Care Act with a $5,000 deductible, which is a lot of people, especially of lower income, that's kind of cost prohibitive. If you got rid of deductibles for people and copays, which you would have, you already are going to be way ahead on a single-payer system. So there's a lot of financial reasons that make it good sense, and yet you're going to see Republicans continue to throw some $32 trillion or whatever fake figure they try to put out there and make it sound like everyone's going to be taxed more. Simply not true.
Rick in Madison, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you doing today?
Good, Rick. How are you?
Good, good. Listen, I got a question for you. Over the last couple of years, news reports have revealed that Mitch McConnell has refused to participate with President Obama to investigate Russia meddling in the 2016 election. He refused to bring up legislation involving election security for the 2020 elections. He's established a partnership with Russia regarding an aluminum plant in his state. And his personal wealth has increased by several millions of dollars over his tenure. My question, Mark, is can he be brought before the House Intelligence Committee to be asked questions regarding the issues I just mentioned? Number one. And number two, do you think it would be beneficial if we could do it?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts, Rick. One, I mean, I think the Senate would likely deal with anything, but I think a few of the things you put out there are a little bit circumstantial, right? Like you're making a jump, a big jump, that his wealth increased, as unfortunately do many folks who serve in the House and Senate, and then the connection to Russia, right? And I think that you need a few more connectors to really make that case. I do think that he has done everything in his power to stop us from trying to protect our elections from Russian interference, and that is absolutely significant. Why he's got the nickname Moscow Mitch is because of that. And I think the fact that this company has got this big investment in his home state also probably has some influences on his decision making. But I think to try to connect all those dots might be a little loose at this point, but we certainly should hold him accountable for doing nothing to protect our elections and, certainly raise the question, is it because there's connection to his home state? What could the connections be? And I think ultimately he's going to have to answer if he refuses to do anything to protect our elections in our country.
Mary in Ouray, Colorado, O-U-R-A-Y?
Yes, Ouray, Colorado.
Okay. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. I know there's several millionaires in the race, and I know there's others out there that would support the Democratic Party. Why don't they use their money instead of running for office to go ahead and help blue states where there's problems with their voting machines, to help them get maybe like paper ballots or definite good voting things? It seems like their money could be better used with that than to be running for president. I know there's areas in the purple states where they could use that kind of thing, and I don't think we're going to get it from the federal government in time.
Congressman?
Yeah, Mary, it's an interesting question you pose, and I'll tell you, I pose it often in a little bit differently. I think Buttigieg, for example, Mayor Buttigieg raised $25 million in the last reporting period, and I look at $25 million, if that was spent in 10 key congressional races, how we could protect the majority, or how you use that maybe in a couple Senate races and how you'd pick up the majority, and that's just a quarter worth of fundraising for one.
Or if it was used to buy a half a dozen radio stations.
Or a half a dozen radio. I mean, go down the list, right, of things that, and quite honestly, other people have been running commercials for quite a while on impeachment, and how that money, it's their money, right? I guess they're going to use it how they want, but I always have posed that question where money could best be spent in some other ways to ensure we have a House and a Senate and ultimately a White House. I do think, though, Mary, there is a lot of movement around paper ballots, and I think we are making some progress on that. So I don't know if I need a billionaire to do it, but I think we are making progress on that.
There you go. There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the big cheese progressive in the U.S. House of Representatives, and frankly, one of the best progressives in the country, even outside of the Senate, is with us taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
His website, pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506 landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. The problem here is that we begin to descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. U.S. government looked inept in failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from a grieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations, but now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed. The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Congressman Mark Pocan on the line with us. Congressman, just an FYI, while we were talking, Donald Trump did his little press scrum on the White House lawn as he was running to his helicopter to fly someplace. And somebody asked him about China, and he looked up at the sky and said, "I am the chosen one." I'm not making this up.
Yeah, and then he retweeted someone who said he's the king of the Jews.
Exactly. Earlier in the day, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's getting weird out there.
I can't imagine what it's like to be a Republican congressperson or senator in your district trying to explain him on a daily basis. I mean, I can explain that's just crazy, and I can say that. But what is... what does Kevin McCarthy do when he goes back to California? How does he actually explain this away?
Yeah, well, I think that his constituents, his Republican constituents, the wealthy white men, by and large, as long as they get their tax cuts, as long as they get brown people trashed, as long as they get some reassurance that the social order is going to be maintained, they're just fine with it. I think. Anyhow, Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mark. I'm wondering, how long are we going to let this pumpkinhead in office perjure himself? He's under oath as the highest office in the nation to preserve, protect, and defend us. How come when there's no equal voice of the Democratic Party on television and radio, how come he gets to spew his lies over and over again, and we never get the opportunity to respond? Thank you. I'll listen to your response later.
Yeah, Stephen, I mean, you're right. All too often, because he says such crazy, outlandish things, he gets lots of press, but we don't necessarily have a Democratic candidate right now for president that would be the normal person getting the equal response, so to speak. I think Nancy Pelosi gets probably the most. Chuck Schumer very close second, but still it's not the same, and it's not the same balance. And Donald Trump continues to say all kinds of crazy things, and you just don't see that in the mainstream media. It's one of the problems we have. Tom and I just talked at the top of the program how we've done a lot of really great things, and we've sent over all these great bills that Mitch McConnell's buried in someone's backyard in Kentucky, and yet we very rarely get the mainstream media to pick that up. They just want to talk about Denmark or whatever new crazy thing the president says.
All right. Rob in Mesa, Arizona. Rob, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman Pocan, thanks for taking the call. Hey, you just actually said the answer there. Trump uses Twitter because he bypasses the press. And all you have to do is for every outlandish thing he puts out there on Twitter, just make sure that Democrats respond. We should be responding to everything he says on Twitter because guess what? Twitter gets published all the time. That's not why I called, though. but it is part of the PR.
But there's no Democrat out there with 65 million Twitter followers.
Yeah. And that the press will guaranteed write whatever they say.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but if you answer, but if you do a response to his Twitter, they
we all do, Rob, every day. Anyhow, to your question for the congressman.
So it basically it's down to the PR thing. The fact that we're not going ahead with impeachment proceedings, I think, is a terrible PR move. It makes us look weak. We look like we don't know what we're doing. I know we're within the laws. They basically voted to hold Barr in contempt. and yet we're not doing anything. And I know that he's the chief. I guess he's supposed to be the one that would tell us whether he can be prosecuted or not, which would make the Attorney General, Barr, more powerful than the president if you could never hold him accountable for anything. We should be pointing that out. We just look weak because we look like the English cops that don't carry guns. Say they're chasing a criminal and they say stop, or I'll say stop again. It's like we have no guts, and that's how we lost last time. Trump came in, he was the bully. He says, I'm going to go in there and knock some heads together.
All right, so let's get to Congressman Pocan's response, Rob. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think I got a little lost because there are quite a few things in there, Rob. But I think the one thing that I mentioned earlier in the program that I do think has been very confusing on behalf of Democrats, and I'm not here to justify it, is we've been terrible on our semantics. But I do believe we are in what Jerry Nadler has said, an impeachment investigation. How that's different than an impeachment inquiry is very minor, in my opinion. It's more of a semantical difference, but I think that's significant when you're not saying something that the rest of the country is using, and even members of Congress are saying we're for an impeachment inquiry, but they're doing that in the Judiciary Committee. They're taking that to the courts to try to use it to compel witnesses. So I think we need to get far better on our semantics, but I do think we are in a different period than we were just a few weeks ago in relation to the impeachment. I just wish it was done more clearly, and I can't really explain why it hasn't been.
Stan in Champaign, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Is that me?
That's you, Stan.
All right. I didn't hear your words. You didn't hear my name. Anyway, Congressman, I've been a lifelong liberal. I had a radio show for 10 years on a program on a station down here, and I only spoke about liberal politics. But I can't understand why you have drank the Kool-Aid. From what I hear you saying, and these are your words, if we do Medicare for all, that's going to free up money for business people to hire more people or pay their current employees higher wages. That is the Kool-Aid of trickle-down economics. That has never worked and never will work because those employers are going to put the money in their pockets. And as long as we have a Medicare for all program that does away with payroll taxes on both sides, and just makes the working class people pay for the entire cost of the health care for all program, that's a huge step backwards for a lot of people.
Yeah, Stan, I completely disagree with you, and I'm guessing you don't have experience in a small business. I have, since I'm 23, been a small business owner. I still am, over 30 years. And I would argue if a small business has a little more money because the money they put towards health insurance is now not going towards that, that will be reinvested to grow the business. Very few people just put that as a profit pocket. So either they're going to hire more people to grow the business, they're going to get new equipment, which will help automate and be able to do more with the business to grow, or in cases where some folks are saying unions won't like this because they negotiated in lieu of salary health insurance benefits, they'll now be able to negotiate for better salaries because they know where that money went. So I really do think from everything we've seen, this is a boon for small businesses, and I say that as a small business person, not just someone offering an opinion of what I think might happen. I'm saying it from, I think, practical experience.
Yeah, and small businesses are about a third of America. I mean, his point may be accurate for big companies, like Walmart and whatnot, but not for small.
But just for those,
right?
Yeah.
But and the way you get around that is you tax corporations to pay for Medicare for all, right?
And we'll have a vehicle, I think, they'll make sure that. Obviously that's taken care of in some way, but we're also going to have a great amount of, cost savings from it. But, I think I've met with just businesses while I'm back in the district, right? When I talk to people, when they wind up with an opportunity where something happens and they have extra money, to the business, they've invested it more and they've grown the business. To every single company I visited, and I just think that's the common practice of my and everyone's businesses I know that are smaller businesses. So I just don't want that, because I think it's kind of a Republican talking point otherwise, and I don't want that to be out there and everyone thinking it's real.
There you go. Kathy in Phoenix, Arizona. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
Hey, Kathy, you're on the air.
Oh, thank you very much. I didn't catch the name, just the Phoenix, Arizona. At any rate, good morning, Tom, and good afternoon, Congressman Pocan. I also have a Medicare for All question. I'm already seeing the ads on TV. I don't know if they're Koch brother funded or what, or insurance company funded, but, stating all the nonsense that Medicare for All will lose our doctors, we'll wait months for appointments, and our taxes will double. And, of course, I get very irritated because I know that's nonsense. So my question is, does the Democratic Party or any other organization you know of have any plans to run ads that tell the truth? Because I know there's a lot of money that's going to go against it, and I would love to contribute money to somebody who is going to spread the truth about it. I love my Medicare, but people who aren't on it yet, just don't understand how it works at all.
Yeah, Kathy, my guess is once we have a Democratic nominee, it's going to be flushed out a lot more because let's face it, there is a plan that Bernie Sanders has, and I think a couple of the Republicans have signed on, but most of them, the Democratic candidates for president, have their own plan. So when they are attacking, they're attacking some generic version of Medicare for All, and it's kind of hard to support whatever amorphous lie they're putting out there. But when you have a nominee, I think you'll have a hard, here is their health care plan and what that means. We have a bill right now in the House that Bernie Sanders has and Pramila Jayapal has in the House and Bernie has in the Senate. But that's only a single version of what I've seen come from the candidates. So I think it's a little hard for us to right now be justifying, here's the defense of whatever. But once you have that nominee, I absolutely guarantee you'll have a much stronger message on health care. But even in the last debate, people are, having fights over the fine details of making sure more people have coverage rather than pointing out that Republicans have spent the last 2.5 years trying to take away people's health insurance, whether it be the Affordable Care Act or the protections for things like pre-existing conditions via doing that. And I think that's where we should be right now. And once we have a nominee with a plan, I think it'll be a slightly different scenario.
It's interesting how, the Democrats running for president who are in favor of having a public option, the Joe Biden plan, versus the Democrats who want Medicare for all, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. The media is portraying it as some sort of battle royale when, in fact, both of them are simply trying to get health care for everybody in America.
Yeah, it's significantly different than any Republican in the country, and I think that's the difference we should be focusing on.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives, taking your calls for the hour here on Middays with Mark. His website, pocan.house.gov.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And, of course, you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman Pocan answering more of your questions right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Cynthia in Curtistown, Hawaii. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello there. Yes, my husband and I listen to you guys every morning, Tom. And,
Thank you.
Hello, Congressman Pocan. So we just wanted to mainly point out and bring up the fact that for the Healthcare for All, or any way to fund the Healthcare for All, that the nurses, I think it was the nurses union, and Bernie Sanders also may have brought up 0.5% tax on stocks and maybe a 1% tax on bonds for Wall Street transactions, and that would be a major way to fund, a Healthcare for All program. And we just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and maybe why doesn't that seem to be promoted more often?
Yeah, Cynthia, I tell you, let me answer it slightly different. I mean, I know there's all different funding schemes that people have for how to do, various forms of health care. I think we can get lost sometimes on the details, and that's where the Republicans love to try to attack us. Something that Nancy Pelosi said when I first got elected that really stuck with me is that values unite, issues divide. So once you get to the plan, people have all these, well, it should be this, or you didn't dot this I, you didn't cross this T. I think what we should be talking about is just the idea that we are the only industrialized country that doesn't have a universal health care system, and that we should. No one should go broke because they're sick. No one shouldn't be able to get health care because they're ill, and we shouldn't be paying the exorbitant amount of money we do on on prescription drugs. And we need to address those sorts of issues. When you raise it to a value, you're going to find far more people agree, and then we'll figure out the details, because that's what's going to happen through the legislative process. But if we lead with the details and not the value, I think we are in a losing battle. So I think the most important thing is, let's talk about that. We're the only industrialized country that doesn't have universal care for its people. We can certainly do that. We're the United States of America. And beyond that, some of the details may get fleshed out. But, Medicare clearly is one of the best, most popular federal programs we have. It's a great delivery system. But we can look at all sorts of things. And I think the more we do that, we will win on this issue.
John in Rockaway Beach, Oregon. John in Rockaway Beach, Oregon. We just have a minute to the break, John. A real quick one, please.
Well, yes. I just wanted to say real quick, I think Bush said he was a chosen one, too, George W. He also I wanted to mention maybe Greenland could buy the U.S. That might be a better idea.
Okay, Congressman, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll tell you,
we'd all get national health care.
Right. We have enjoyed this week the whole Greenland debate.
We'd all get paid vacations.
I know.
We'd all get family leave.
I would love to see Donald Trump answer any of those questions, Tom.
Our minimum wage would go up to $18 an hour. I'm serious.
It's a debate to have, I know. And but
you'd have guaranteed housing.
Yeah, it's amazing that he's offended that they won't sell him their property. I mean, it is just all so ridiculous that, you wish this were a really bad novel or someone was doing the world's biggest punking. But unfortunately, it's just the President of the United States.
Yeah, this is not The Onion.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's coming up on, 10 minutes before the hour. There we go, 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the true people's media. Talk media for the rest of us. We'll be right back. Hey, we just put up a new rant. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And welcome back, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls. And Loretta in Darien, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. I just have a question I've been thinking about for a while now. Just to be even-sided, I keep hearing that there's a lot of bills that have been passed by the House that have not been taken up by Mitch McConnell. I'd like to know how many bills have been passed by the Senate that Nancy Pelosi has buried.
Yeah, Laura, I don't have the exact number, but I can tell you it's very few. From talking to a lot of senators that I fly with, when I go back and forth, I often fly with senators from Wisconsin and Michigan, and all they do these days are pass conservative judges. So really, he is having a significant impact on the courts, changing the nature of it by putting extreme conservatives in, but they've done virtually nothing. I mean, we've passed 10 appropriation bills, 10 of the 12, ready for the September 30th end of our fiscal year, and the Senate's done zero because they were waiting for the debt ceiling and some other stuff to get done that just got done a couple weeks ago. There's no way they can get that done just in the time they have, so we're probably going to have a continuing resolution. They're just not doing their jobs, period, other than approving conservative judges. So I think the number is very small that they have sent to us that we haven't taken up.
James in Spokane, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, smallest item first. I heard an economist the other day say that if wages had kept up with production, minimum wage would be about $50 an hour now.
Wow. Yeah, I know. I've heard that only in the 20s. But anyhow, to your question.
Yeah, concerning prison reform, nothing reflects on us around the world so badly in my 60 years of life as what happens in our prisons. They're under the care and protection of the state. They're being raped, beat up, and murdered all the time. We joke about it. It's a horrible situation. I know we're doing what we can. We haven't done enough until they're empty. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, James, I agree with you. I used to do a lot of this work in the Wisconsin state legislature. I was the ranking Dem on the corrections committee when Scott Walker was still in the legislature. Before he was governor, he was the chair of the committee. When you look at the number of people who are there for drug-related offenses, which are generally nonviolent offenses, when you look at the percent that are there that have mental illness, which is probably 25 to 30%, when you start looking at who's really there and a cost-benefit analysis of who we should have there, we spend an awful lot of money on incarceration rather than education or health care. In fact, in Wisconsin, for a period, it almost got to, we spent more on corrections than we did our university system, which is a renowned world-class university system. So I agree with you, James, and there's some progress we can have maybe federally. There's some Republicans who want to get smart on crime instead of just tough on crime, but we haven't seen enough movement yet on this.
Heather in Lansing, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I have a quick question, kind of. In regard to the impeachment, do we even have time to go through that process and see it to fruition before the next election? And if we don't, how do we get the popular vote to make a difference? Because we obviously didn't elect this president popularly. So the Electoral College got in the way. What do we even do if we can't impeach him before he potentially gets reelected?
Yeah, well, so the first question, for all you know, Don McGahn could come out and say, absolutely, I was told to fire him, and he lied. That might be enough, right? If you had something as simple as that, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's part of why we're doing the process in order to get witnesses to come that he's trying not to have come, because if they tell the truth, there will be damning evidence in there that looks like obstruction by the president. That's the first answer. Second answer is, still it's the electoral process. By putting more of this information out there, hopefully people will realize that it's not in the national best interest to have Donald Trump president. We had a lot of Democrats stay home, 200 to 250,000 in Wisconsin last presidential election, and Donald Trump won my state by 23,000. We can't let that happen again. If we would have had turnout, he wouldn't have won Wisconsin, he wouldn't have won Michigan, and he wouldn't have won Pennsylvania, and the popular vote would have actually elected the president. So we just have to take that issue separate from impeachment and do everything we can to make sure people are getting out to vote and be heard.
David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, sir. I want to make two salient points about the Medicare and one other point. First of all, a drastic reduction in litigation. This is something you guys need to do about...
David, we have just 1 minute left until the end of the hour. Please ask your question.
Drastic reduction in litigation due to assigning liability for hospitalization and doctor's care. That's a major portion that would do a great relief on the states and the government, because there's a lot of litigation involved in who has to pay the bills for doctors, who has to pay the bills for hospitalization. And when we talk about how we pay for it, just raising the cap on Social Security and Medicare from where it is now would greatly enhance the financials of it.
Okay, Congressman, you want to respond to that? You got 20 seconds.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of different areas you have cost savings when you go to a single-payer system, and one of them has probably just been described by David. And I would just recommend all your listeners, again, to remember your members of Congress and the Senate are home in August. This is your best chance to try to get them face-to-face or get them at events, and make sure you're being heard. Let them know what you think and ask your questions, because this is the best opportunity you're going to have all year.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much for being with us, Congressman.
Yeah, of course, Tom. Thank you as always.
Great talking. And have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Congressman Pocan's website, by the way, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be back. Are more tax cuts for the wealthy coming? Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Preece. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well. Only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, Just 2 years earlier, he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor." Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig national convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
For
Thom Hartmann Program.
As mentioned, this portion of our program brought to you by Phone.com. In the first hour of the program, we were talking about Donald Trump and the second coming, and he just, excuse me, on the White House lawn just a few minutes ago said, I am the chosen one, and he's retweeting Wayne Allen Root saying, he's the reincarnation of God. And also talking about how Donald Trump is saying that American Jews who don't support basically him and his attacks on Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib are disloyal. This old story of Jews being loyal, having dual loyalties. And one of those loyalties, whether it's to, Jewishness in general or whether it's specifically to Israel, superseding their loyalty to their country. This was one of the major talking points that Hitler used to justify the extermination of Jews. It's one of the major talking points that was used in Iraq to justify the extermination of Jews. It was one of, post Saddam Hussein. It's one of the major talking points that's been used all over the world to justify killing Jews. It was, during the Spanish Inquisition, this was one of their big things. These people are not loyal to Spain. And here is Donald Trump, the President of the United States, repeating this on Twitter, no less. So anyhow, that was our first hour. We were talking about that. The second hour, of course, Congressman Mark Pocan took your calls for a whole hour, and it was just some fascinating topics that came up. But there are a few other news stories that I want to get into here, and then I'll pick up your phone calls, and we can all, chew the fat on all this stuff, discuss all these things. I guess now that I'm a vegan, I shouldn't use the phrase chew the fat. That's an old expression. Anyhow, the ice raids down in Mississippi a week or two ago, where a mother was torn apart from her nursing child, and where this little 8-year-old broke down in tears, and the TV cameras captured that, and I mean, it doesn't get worse than this. Well, it turns out that ICE seems to have a long history of busting workers. Now, keep in mind, the management never suffered any consequence, even though ever since 1986, it has been a crime, as in huge fines and go to jail crime, to employ people who are here without documentation. It is against the law. But that law does not get enforced. Reagan didn't enforce it, Bush didn't enforce it, Clinton didn't enforce it, Bush didn't enforce it, Obama didn't enforce it, and Trump's not enforcing it. Why? Because, hey, the employers are part of the white power structure. But when they employ brown people, we're going to go after those brown people. Well, the story is getting a little more mixed than that, and there's a great piece. Zach Ford wrote about this over on Think Progress this morning. There were 700 workers detained last Wednesday, and they targeted 7 Koch Foods, no relation to the Koch brothers, but it's spelled K-O-C-H, 7 Koch food poultry plants in Morton, Mississippi. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Last year, these Hispanic undocumented workers at this Koch Foods plant sued Koch Foods for racial discrimination, national origin discrimination, and sexual harassment. Now, typically, employers who employ people who are undocumented get away with this kind of stuff. In fact, they even get away with rape and theft because the people are afraid to report it because they're afraid of ICE. Well, apparently, these chicken workers, these people in the poultry plants, were not afraid to report it. They knew how important they were to Koch Foods. I mean, 700 workers. And so they sued them, and Koch Foods settled for $3.75 million, $3.75 million. So the question, is this why ICE came in? Is Koch Foods trying to punish workers who sue people who hire illegal immigrants, to use the right-wing phrase, undocumented workers? The lawsuit that was put before the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, said, and I'm quoting from the lawsuit here, that supervisors touched and or made sexually suggestive comments to female Hispanic employees, hit Hispanic employees, and charged many of them money for normal everyday work activities. Others were discharged or subject to other forms of retaliation when they complained. So you got uppity workers who use the law and win a $3 million settlement. And surprise, surprise, just a few months later, ICE shows up. Boy, those workers will think twice about doing that again, won't they? I'm serious. I mean, this is, these guys are depending on people living in fear of ICE. So, hey, bring ICE in. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, another dimension of Stephen Miller's racist cruelty, under the Flores settlement back from 1997 or 1998, this was a court settlement. ICE, basically, it was the predecessor to ICE, agreed that we would hold children no more than 3 days and undocumented immigrants no more than 20. Trump just blew that up. This is Gabe Ortiz writing about this, and he doesn't pull any punches. Keep in mind, 7 children have now died in the custody of the Trump concentration camps. Something that's unprecedented. It hasn't happened before, to the best of my knowledge, in our history. So Gabe Ortiz over at Daily Kos writes, the Trump administration is trying to kill more brown children by moving to keep them and their families jailed indefinitely, announcing a new rule on Wednesday that would terminate a decades-old court settlement that protects vulnerable migrant children in U.S. custody. He references the Flores Agreement. And not only does it prohibit detention of children for more than 20 days, but it requires that they be, I said 3 days, I was wrong, it was 20. But it also requires that they be treated with safety and dignity under basic standards of care. That's a quote from the Flores Agreement. So what does Stephen Miller call these things? Loopholes! And with loopholes, you've got to close loopholes. Right? No kids had died under U.S. watch in years until last year, Gabe Ortiz writes. And these kids do not belong in detention. I mean, what a place to grow up. Prison! Because your parents were trying to save you from being murdered by people back home. Meanwhile, I mentioned before we hit the break and came into this hour that Trump is exploring tax cuts. Now, this is fascinating. He is saying to his rich donors, and this is a message that was conveyed by Mick Mulvaney to a group of people who were paying a couple $100,000 apiece to come to a rubber chicken dinner. Actually, it's probably a pretty good dinner. So that they could give their money to Donald Trump. And Mick Mulvaney was there at this. In fact, it was headlined by Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. The whole grifter clan is out there running the grift. And he said, yeah, there's going to be a recession. Now, he's speaking in private to rich people. In other words, get your portfolio ready. The stock market's going to fall. Get out of stocks and get into bonds right now. I'm giving you inside information, Mick Mulvaney. There is going to be a real risk of recession, but it will, quote, be short and moderate. Actually, the exact quote is moderate and short. And so what is Trump thinking about doing about this? Well, he wants to cut the payroll tax. That's a twofer for him. Payroll tax funds Social Security. You cut the payroll tax, and yes, you will stimulate the economy because you're putting money in the hands not of rich people, because you don't even pay the payroll tax if you make over $150,000 a year. I don't remember the exact point. I think it's $132,000, something like that, but whatever it is. You don't even pay payroll tax if you make more than that. So if you reduce the payroll tax rate, then yeah, sure enough, people, working people and working poor people will have more money in their pockets, and they will spend that, and that will stimulate the economy. That's why Obama did it for a year right after the George W. Bush crash of 2008. There's a debate over whether this requires the consent of Congress. It may not. And he also wants to index the capital gains rate to inflation. I'm not sure exactly what he means by that. He's talking about cutting the capital gains rate. Indexing it to inflation seems like it would be the other way around, but maybe not. Maybe it's that thing. Oh, and by the way, the U.S. Labor Department, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, just revised their numbers for March of this year. You know, they published the statistics based on some basically samples. And then they do a deep dive into the real numbers, and they come out with the real numbers. Last year, 2018, for example, they downward adjusted the total employment numbers by 43,000. Well, they just did this for March, just the month of March. And this from MarketWatch. The U.S. economy had 501,000 fewer jobs in March 2019 than previously reported, government revisions show. 500,000 fewer jobs in March than Trump and the Trump administration was saying. So, you know, hang on to your hat. I mean, you know, these are all signs that the recession is coming. The big question is the recession going to hit next week, next month, early next year? How long can this, boom be sustained? I mean, typically after the yield curve inverts, which happened, it's because the Fed can control short-term rates, but long-term rates are defined by the market. So when more and more people bail out of the stock market and buy long-term bonds, figuring, hey, last chance to get even a 2% yield over a 10 or 30-year period, when that happens, the yield goes down because the demand goes up. That's called a yield curve inversion. It means basically people are getting ready for winter. But typically it takes 10 months.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Which puts us into what, May, June of next year? Whatever it is, it's going to be interesting. Stick around. We'll be right back. We'll pick up your calls after this. And welcome back. Nathan in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Nathan, what's up? Nathan, watch this at Free Speech TV?
Yes, I'm here.
You're on the air.
Yeah. So, a couple months ago, I'm trying to pick you up, Tom. The thing is, you made a point that Trump might be the depression that we need. We don't need a Great Depression because this guy is so bad. I want you to pick that point back up.
His approval rating among all voters is 55% on the economy right now. Typically, when a president's approval rating on the economy is over 50%, he wins re-election. Jimmy Carter had a recession. He also had the Iran-Contra thing, so his numbers went down. But that's the story, Nathan. So I'm concerned. I'm very concerned. And winter is coming. I mean, we've never, in the history of the United States, we've never had an expansionary period that lasted more than 10 years. And here we are. And Trump is milking it for all it's worth. And in a way, that is setting him up for the fall, I think. I hope. We'll see. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I wanted to talk about the upcoming change for employer health insurance plans. Certainly one of the big criticisms about Medicare for All is it doesn't have choice. People don't get to keep the insurance plan they want. Well, starting on January the 1st, 2020, Trump made a big change to what they call health savings accounts or health reimbursement accounts. Mm-hmm. So employers can start funding those accounts with a lump sum of money so that you as an individual employee can go out on the open market and buy whatever insurance policy you want, absolving
I thought these programs were to fill in the blanks. They were to cover things like deductibles.
They were, but Trump changed that. He's saying they now can be used to buy health insurance policies. Right.
Right.
So you'll have a fixed cost.
But isn't the limit on an HSA $5,000 a year?
they're changing it all.
They're raising that limit.
This is going to be a revolutionary change.
So then wealthy, so what they're doing is they're setting it up for, if we get Medicare for all, then there will still be private health insurance companies. I doubt they'll be banned by law, but they'll change their business model to serving the very wealthy. So now what the very wealthy do is they move their money into an HSA. Say they put $30,000 a year into an HSA, which is fully tax deductible, and then they use that HSA money to buy a gold-plated health insurance policy with helicopters instead of ambulances.
There you go. But it underlies the big false criticism that, these corporate health insurance policies are going to stand for time immemorial, like some eternal verity. Well, they're not. They're jettisoning them as quickly as possible. It's analogous to the pensions falling to the 401k.
Right.
It's the same process.
Right. Interesting. Very interesting. Thanks a lot for the heads up on that, Paul. I'll have to look into it. I appreciate your call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV via Roku. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We'll be back with more of your calls today here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Viagra for your brain. Just don't tell Limbaugh he'll want some. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. One other thing I wanted to just toss on the table here for conversation. I brought this up with Congressman Pocan in the previous hour, and I'm curious to hear if you think that I'm crazy on this or if this is crazy like a fox. We know that Mitch McConnell will not take up articles of impeachment in the Senate, or even if he does, if the Supreme Court forces him to, because that's what the Constitution says, the Republicans in the Senate in all probability will not vote to impeach Trump. I mean, we can have this nice fantasy about it, and hey, maybe suddenly they'll get a spine and they'll think, okay, this is the way to get rid of this guy, and we can go back to normal and just be kind of quiet closet racists rather than out front racists and all that kind of stuff. And that, of course, is a remote possibility, but I put that possibility at like 5 or 10% because I think that these people are spineless, A, and B, they're benefiting tremendously by Trump being in office. I mean, they're getting massive tax cuts. They're getting deregulation for the industries that support their candidacies. The corruption is through the roof, which, of course, is always good for the Republican Party because it's how they make their money. So, let's take it as a given that there's no way that the Senate is going to convict Donald Trump, and he's therefore not going to be removed from office by impeachment. I don't see that, and that's been used as the justification for not impeaching him in the House of Representatives. I don't see that as any kind of reasonable justification not to impeach him. Andrew Johnson wasn't removed from office, and yet the stain on his reputation throughout history will be that he was impeached. Bill Clinton was not removed from office, and to some extent, I mean, for Andrew Johnson, they actually had serious crimes that he was accused of. For Bill Clinton, it was lying about having sex with Monica Lewinsky. I think most Americans are like, really? Which is why he actually, became more popular after he was impeached. Had nothing to do with the impeachment process. And I realize that there have been, all these, Republicans, Bill Kristol and these guys go on MSNBC and say, well, Clinton ended up more popular, therefore you don't want to impeach Trump. BS. This is more like the Nixon impeachment. But in any case, what if the House was to impeach Trump? Hold the hearings, lay out his crimes, make them obvious for everybody, incorporate them into the articles of impeachment so that they are a permanent part of the historic record for the rest of time, and then don't even refer it to the Senate. You know, there are people who say, well, we can't impeach him. We should have a resolution of censure, which is a slap on the wrist, right? It's like there's no therefore. There's nothing that happens as a consequence of censure other than there's a record that you are behaving badly. Well, why not make that record an impeachment? I mean, let's get this show on the road, guys. What do you think? Or do you think that that's a bad idea because then Trump will say, well, they never got rid of me in the Senate? What's your opinion?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls after this short break, as they say in radio and television. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to President." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, never again. Each time, never again had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price. Indeed, to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler, Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then, in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book Defying Hitler.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. I've got another rant here that I think I'm going to get into this tomorrow, why Medicare Advantage costs taxpayers billions more than it should. There's this huge scam going on around Medicare Advantage, and if you're on one of these plans, look out. Carol in Menneson, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm watching you on Roku right now.
Oh, cool. That's Free Speech TV via Roku. Yeah.
Yeah, right, because my computer's down, and I have Comcast, so I couldn't watch you. So I got a Roku for those who want to watch you and are in the same situation.
Yeah.
It's great.
It is. That's, in fact, we're using, it's a whole long story. Anyhow, yes,
yeah,
Carol.
That isn't why I called, though. I called because I'm becoming increasingly concerned about Trump's personality. It seems to be disintegrating in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And
are you talking about his saying he's the chosen one this morning?
Oh, that put me right over the top. Yeah, my hair went on fire. There's something very wrong with this man.
Yes.
I don't know. If we can't 25th him because Pence is nothing but a puppet, a sycophant.
And apparently there's not a quorum in the cabinet, according to an earlier caller. That's something that would probably end up before the Supreme Court, and by that time the election would be over.
Yeah, I just don't understand it, because it's so clear that the man's very sick, very confused, and obviously somehow demented. And then this morning he also insulted the Prime Minister of Denmark.
He called her nasty, which is a word that he reserves for women.
I know, and I heard her speaking, and she was so gracious and pleasant about his visit, how much she was looking forward to it. And he tweeted back in his 35-minute tweet storm this morning that you can't talk to the United States this way.
I'm sure he was reacting to Fox News.
Oh, he has me so upset half the time. I will be so glad to see him gone. Yeah. And if they don't impeach him, I'm really frightened that he's going to get reelected.
Louise and I are up to the 6th or 7th episode. In fact, we got a Showtime subscription just to watch this, or bought it through our Amazon Prime thing, in order to watch The Loudest Voice in the Room. Or The Loudest Voice, I guess, is the title of the series. It's about Roger Ailes and the starting of Fox News. And we're up to the one where Roger Ailes is building the bomb shelter, and his wife is, taking this young newspaperman protege down to show it to him, and it is screaming weird. I mean, it is so worth going out of your way, or even spending a few extra bucks at Showtime, and then even if you have to cancel after a month or two after you've seen it, to watch this series. It is breathtaking. But anyhow, back to you, Carol. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm going to do that. That sounds very fascinating. Well, what troubles me so much, they're being so on and off about this impeachment. I mean, is he being impeached now or not? Because if he isn't, what are they talking about? I mean, Nadler says yes, and then you hear, well, we don't have the quorum that we need to do it. I don't understand what's happening.
Well, apparently, I mean, I brought this up with both Congressman Khanna, who's I believe a Yale Law School graduate, and with Congressman Pocan, who's been around the legislative process, and politics for a long, long time. And my understanding is that if Congress, if the full Congress, the House of Representatives, if the full House of Representatives, or if just the Judiciary Committee, and I'm not clear on which of those it might be, and I'm not sure that it's ever been adjudicated, by the Supreme Court, frankly. I just don't think we know. But if one or the other of those two bodies votes for and in the vote, it says it has the word impeachment for an impeachment inquiry, then at that point, the Judiciary Committee they cease to be an Article I branch of government, Article I being the legislature. Article 2 is the executive, Article 3 is the judiciary, and they then take on the functions under the impeachment clause of the Constitution of the Article 3 branch of government. In other words, they become a judicial body, and as such, they have essentially the powers of a grand jury. They can call any witness, they can imprison that witness if they refuse to testify, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the question is it enough for Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, to simply say, well, we've decided that what we've been doing for a few months is, in fact, an impeachment inquiry? If they try to take that to the Supreme Court and say, please enforce our subpoenas, I think they're going to get knocked down. I think that they need to have an absolute, full, unambiguous vote, whether it's at the full House or whether it's just at the Judiciary Committee, to establish, even a subcommittee or to empower the entire Judiciary Committee to do an impeachment inquiry. Now, I am not a lawyer, but even if I were, I mean, even anybody who's a lawyer, the problem is, like I said, this has never been presented to the Supreme Court, and Trump will almost certainly try to do that. So I would go for the strongest possible way of doing it, which they have not yet done so far, to the best of my knowledge.
I agree with that. And also, as it happens. I lost my train of thought. Totally.
That's okay. Happens to the best of us, Carol. We'll talk again. Thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. Terry in Long Island, listening to WBAI. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? I'm listening to what you were saying, and it's pretty much along the lines of what I'm thinking about, because I don't understand. When Obama was in office, just about every decision that he wanted to make, it was being blocked. So I don't understand how this president is able to make so many decisions that cause so many problems that you constantly hear, this is unprecedented, this was never done before, but nobody's doing anything.
Right. Well, and this is, the remedy is impeachment. And if it wasn't for the Department of Justice memo, one during the Nixon administration from the Nixon Justice Department, and the second during the Clinton administration, during the Clinton impeachment hearings, where the Department of Justice, working for Nixon and working for Clinton and Nixon, said, no, you can't indict a sitting president because their job is just they're so busy all the time. And keep in mind, 1 out of 3 days since Trump was elected, he's spent at Trump properties. He plays golf constantly. He watches TV for 10 hours a day. I mean, he certainly has time to deal with an actual criminal proceeding. But so far, the Justice Department has taken this position that you can't indict a sitting president. So, number one, this is what impeachment's for. And number two, frankly, in my opinion, this is what the criminal law is for. And one of the first things that Congress needs to do once the Democrats get control of it is change the law, is actually pass a law saying that no man or woman is above the law. And that if a president commits a crime in the present or in the past, and the knowledge of it comes forward, that they can be charged under the criminal statutes of the country.
Yes, and what's so scary is, I just want to say real quick, is it reminds me too much of what happened with Hitler. They knew what he was doing, and they let him get bigger and stronger and make decisions and do things that he shouldn't have done until it became a catastrophe. Right. And I feel like this is what is happening with this man. He is getting too much time in order to do horrendous things that won't even be able to be repaired.
I agree. And as laid out in Milton Mayer's book, they thought they were free. The Germans went along with this step by step by step because every change was an incremental change. It was a little incremental change. Oh, we're going to stop. Yes. We're going to militarize the border. Oh, we're going to put some immigrants in jail. Oh, we're going to put a few more immigrants in jail. Oh, some children got separate. And it's like if you had just started with the extreme policies where we are right now, people would have exploded into the streets. But because they did it incrementally over a 2.5-year period, and the other thing, Terry, that the Germans were always waiting for was the one big shocking thing that Hitler was going to do where they could revolt, and that one big shocking thing never came because everything was, right up to the death camps. It was all incremental. The death camps were the consequence of the concentration camps. The concentration camps are the consequence of the initial detentions. Yes.
And that's the problem with Donald Trump. It's not that he's smart. It's just that he is aware that he's able to use the laws that are in place right now in order to do the things that he's doing.
Yeah,
so
I'm completely with you.
He knows enough about that. He's listening to his lawyers or he's listening to anybody that knows about the law, and step by step he's probably saying, can I do this? And what would be the consequences?
There you go. You're absolutely right.
Saying, this is going to be held up.
Terry, I want to get some more calls in here, but I completely agree with you. Thank you for the call. Horace in High Point, North Carolina. Hey, Horace, what's up?
Tom, I just wanted to say that, the Democrats have quite a few people who are very articulate, but they're always playing defense. What they should do is to knock 100,000% Mitch McConnell, especially for what he's doing with the Russians insofar as putting that aluminum plant in Kentucky.
Yeah, it's starting to seriously hurt him. I mean, there's billboards all over Kentucky right now calling him Moscow Mitch.
Okay, but what they have to do is to make it such a media blitz about the elections that the way he's trying to keep them from getting a better grip insofar as them not being able to infiltrate our votes. Yeah. That's what he's doing. And they're not doing it. They got Twitter, Facebook, New York Times, the Post. Blitz them 24/7. Have it all over the country. Yeah. The man will buckle. He will buckle. And Donald Trump and all of those oligarchs that he got there, they are going to jail because they're doing nothing but selling this country out for money. Yeah. That's what they're doing.
There you go. And frankly, Mitch knows, in fact, he was advised even before the election that the Russians were helping Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And I think he thinks, hey, I'm a Republican. I'd like their help. That's what's going on. Horace, thank you for the call. And not just the Russians, by the way. It was the Saudis and the Emiratis as well.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I guess the question next time around is, what are the Chinese going to do? Anyhow, I believe Bob Ney is going to be with us in about 4 minutes. Stick around. And welcome back. Dot in Upland, California. Hey, Dot, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, I just want to let you know I've just got back from Washington and Oregon and a trip, and I believe the recession has already started.
What are your indicators?
Family members who work in international sales, and their sales are down. International business. My husband's getting laid off because of international and national sales are down.
Mm.
And
You're talking about Trump's trade war?
I'm not sure what it's all about, but
well, the whole world is soft right now. I mean, Europe is in negative interest rates, and for 7,000 years, the economics profession told us negative interest rates were impossible, and they're doing it right now in the Eurozone.
Right, and in our small block, we have of about 8 houses, 2 are in foreclosure.
Whoa.
So it's happening, and we live in, what do they call them, McMansions.
Right, yeah. And housing prices have been sliding for the last 6 months or so.
And Alaska's getting hit worse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Alaska.
Interesting, because last time around it was Alaska and Las Vegas, as I recall, that got hit the worst because they were both in housing bubbles in 2008.
Well, actually, last time Alaska didn't get hit.
Oh, really?
They really went through it okay because they had the permanent fund. Now that their governor's taken their permanent fund away.
Wait a minute, the permanent fund got taken away?
Well, it's down really low. It's like, and it's not near what it was.
Oh, this is because the permanent fund is paid out of the interest that they make on their principal, and the interest payments are getting lower because of these low interest rates. Is that it?
Well, they made a new deal with the oil companies.
Oh, geez.
The new governor did.
Of course.
So their permanent fund is really not even half of what it was.
Oh, you wonder if he'll get reelected?
That governor, I hope not.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Dot,
anyway,
thanks a lot for the call.
I
need to move along, but thank you for sharing your story with us. I appreciate it. Lynn in Long Branch, Washington. Hey, Lynn, we got about a minute and a half. What's up?
Morning, my dear friend. You are a blessing to this whole world.
Thank you.
I am so pleased with listening to you every day. You make my heart.
Well, let's get right to it.
Oh, yes,
if
sir.
we can, please.
The quick thing is, I want to know why it is the world doesn't pay attention to history. They don't listen to the past to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
They're not gaining a thing. They're not realizing how much history repeats itself.
I think a lot of Europeans are singing the song that, they get it. I mean, they lived through World War II. We largely did not, and a lot of the GIs who came back from World War II just really didn't want to talk about it. And, I mean, I didn't hear my dad's stories of World War II until he was nearly on his deathbed.
Yes, well, what makes me so blistering hot is I'm 68 years old, and my parents went through the Second World War. And people don't seem to realize that if we don't protect ourselves and do for each other, this world will implode on itself. What do you think?
I agree. I think that severe recession produces a risk of war, as well as demagogues and all that other kind of stuff. Yes, of course, but war as well. And I share your concern. Lynn, thank you so much for the call, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back with more of your calls. It looks like Bob is not calling in, so we'll just continue taking your calls right up to the end of the hour. Stick around. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. On the line with us is the author of Sideswiped, Bob Ney, former congressman from Ohio. Bob, what's up in the world today?
Well, hi, Tom. Well, we're looking in particular on the immigration side at the announcement by the Trump administration that they're going to attempt to basically overturn what's known as the Flores Settlement Agreement. And, of course, that was made in 1997, and it had a 12-year court battle, which went actually up into the Supreme Court, a portion of it, before the settlement actually occurred. And under that settlement, and by the way, it was as a result of a 12-year-old girl, and her name, there's actually two girls, and but the famous name became Jenny Flores. And she was held in Pasadena in a hotel room and was subject to body cavity, strip searches. She was kept in rooms with adults, totally unrelated to them. They didn't know them. And this all occurred back in 1985. And as a result of it was a really, I don't think people really realized what happened back there. It was, no suitable living accommodations, food, appropriate clothing, hygiene, nothing, no school. And so as a result of this, it wound through the court system, again, after a 12-year period. So this was pretty thoroughly vetted, Tom. And then the settlement and agreement came, and that would be, of course, that there would be a release after 20 days. That way there would not be expanded detentions and family detentions. So this new rule, basically, Tom, what it will do is it'll eliminate that stipulation that undocumented children and teens be released after 20 days. Now, on the surface, what you're going to hear from the administration is that, look, they'll be held, just for a 90-day period is what they're going to be held. But if you look at the facts, a report from the Washington Post, which was in just May of this year, indicates there's a backlog of more than 850,000 immigration cases in the U.S. and 450 judges to hear them. So if you start to just do the numbers, there is no way this is just going to be a 90-day deal and then their case is going to be heard. This will be long-term detention.
Long-term. So this is Stephen Miller pushing his cruelty at all costs.
Well, of course. And on your show now, in the last, I think, 2 or 3 weeks now, with our reports that we've been going through, we've had, I believe, 6 now different reports on immigration changes, be they with undocumented, there's changes proposed with legal immigration.
Right.
And again, I've mentioned on your show before, there are changes that we don't even hear about that are occurring through American embassies all over the world at the request of this administration, I'm sure, otherwise they wouldn't be going on, to further restrict tourist visas, student visas, marriage visas. It's happening, and I hope someday that we can get more information on that. It's hard to get it.
Let me add to this for you, Bob. I don't know if you caught this. NBC News is just now reporting that the Trump administration is proposing that even when the federal government grants asylum to somebody comes to the United States, applies for asylum, a judge hears their case and says, yes, you are a legitimate asylum seeker, you may settle in the United States legally for a period of time, right? Even when that happens, that individual states and individual towns can refuse to take them, can say, sorry, you are not, asylum seekers are not welcome in our town.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's like,
and that'll be a rule. They would do that through a rule.
Yeah, a policy change.
Well, and again,
according to NBC News,
going on, we don't even know about in embassies. That I'm sure one day we will find out about it. It's legal immigration.
Yes, this is legal.
Sure. And the other story, Tom, I don't know what to say about the Greenland story. We carried it today. I just don't know what to say about it. I actually had a theory maybe that last week they were in the Oval Office and the president said, okay, now for next week, how about I propose we buy Greenland?
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that.
Well, he
if
was
it's
trained
from-
well by NBC. Always grab people's attention every episode, leave them hanging. At the end of every episode, and at the new episode, set it up. You define the dialogue. You define the topic. I mean, he's doing it. It's reality TV. He's doing it brilliantly.
Because it makes absolutely no sense to put that out. Then he has a trip to Denmark, and the Prime Minister of Denmark, of course, she came out and said, "Look, this is up to Greenland anyway," and she thought it was she was hoping it was a joke. And so as a result, then, he cancels the trip to Denmark. If this was about purchasing Greenland and that's why he was going to go to Denmark, he could have made a phone call. You don't set up a trip. So I just looked at this entire story, and I figure that it seriously had to be planned out, or possibly they just didn't want to go to Denmark for some reason and then said, "Hey, let's buy Greenland," knowing it would be turned down.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm an Occam's razor kind of guy. I think he got a burr under his saddle about this thing, and it blew up in his face.
Right.
Yeah. Amazing. Bob Ney. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great talking with you, and thank you for being with us today and throughout. It's Wednesday throughout this week so far. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the Thom Hartmann Program, continuing to chronicle the crimes of the Trump administration and it's not even the crimes. I mean, the crimes are fairly awful, but just the bizarre and hysterical and hateful nature of it is shocking. So anyhow, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!